All right. Hello, everyone. I'm live. I did not troubleshoot the audio. Okay, yeah, seems like it's working. Let me know if everything's all right. So I thought I'd do a call-in stream about the anthropic argument. I recently made a post about the anthropic argument, and lots of people had lots of criticisms, as people often do, regarding posts about the anthropic argument. So I thought, seems like it would be a good thing to do to have a call-in show where anyone can call in and raise their criticisms of the anthropic argument, and I will explain why all the criticisms are wrong. Okay, first caller. Hello, Rodrigo. You're on mute.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, doing well. How are you?
Very good. I just chanced upon the, I think it was on Substack, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, here I
am. So did you read my post about the anthropic argument?
No, I didn't see it, but I can read it real quick. How should I?
Oh, I don't know if it's the kind of post that you can read real quick. It's about 13,000 words. So
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, so I guess I can explain it. Yeah. So this was probably, lots of people, about 30-ish people left comments criticizing it. So I thought, seems worth having a live stream where anyone can call in and raise their criticisms. The basic argument, so it's an argument for the existence of God. The basic idea is, so it starts from the observation that you exist, right? Okay, that's true, you exist. And then the idea is, by the way, is my audio okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. I was running slightly late, so I didn't troubleshoot prior to getting live. But so it starts with the observation that you exist. And then there's a view known as the self-indication assumption. And what the self-indication assumption says is that you're likelier to exist if there are more people. So for example, suppose that a coin gets flipped. If it comes up heads, one person gets created. And if it comes up tails, 10 people get created. The self-indication assumption says that you should think that tails is 10 times likelier than heads on the grounds that tails makes it 10 times as likely that you would come to exist. Hey, Hayden. So suppose we grant the self-indication assumption. And there are lots of arguments for it that I go into in the post. But this is just the speed run version. So if we grant the self-indication assumption, if we grant that your existence is likelier if there are more people, let's say if there are 10 people, your existence is 10 times likelier. If there are 100 people, your existence is 100 times as likelier. Well, by this reasoning, if there are infinite people, your existence is infinite times likelier. And in fact, given that there are bigger and smaller infinites, this argument won't just get you to thinking that there are infinite people. It will get you to thinking that there's a big infinity worth of people, that the number of people is not just some, small, little diminutive infinity, but whatever the most people that could be exists, the idea is the argument will tell you that's the number of people that exist. Where, if you think that a theory that says 1,000 people is 1,000 times as likely as one that says there's one person, it explains your existence 1,000 times as well. For any theory that predicts fewer people than the maximum number that there could be, it will predict 0% of possible people existing, and so then your existence will be infinitely unlikely. So that's the basic idea. So from this, from the fact that you exist, the self-indication assumption says you should think that the number of people that exist is the most that there could be. Hello, Joseph. And then the idea is, if that's true, that gives you evidence for the existence of God. If there is a good God, and this good God desires to create, then God would have a reason to create lots and lots of people. After all, if it's good to create, God wouldn't just stop after creating one person or 5 people or 10. God would keep creating. So God's existence makes it very likely that you'd get some huge infinity worth of people. In contrast, if there is no God, it's quite unlikely that you'd have a huge infinity worth of people. Even if the universe is infinite in size, that only gets you Aleph null people, which is the smallest infinity. Even in standard multiverse models, only get you a fairly small infinity worth of people. So the basic argument is you exist. According to the self-indication assumption, this gives you evidence that the number of people that exist is the most that there could be. And then lastly, the argument says that if the number of people is the most that there could be, then you should think that God exists, because theism is the best explanation of why the number of people is the most that there could be. By the way, Joseph, you're not muted, and so there's some noise. There's some noise coming from your mic. Yeah, okay. So, hey, Joseph, do anyone have any objections they want to raise? If not, I can respond to some of the objections that are raised in the chat.
Okay, I have an objection.
Okay,
I'm a
sounds good.
mathematician, and I think I think that the way that you're dealing with these levels of infinity isn't really right. You talk about Aleph 0 and Beth 2, and I understand what you mean there, but I think that you're assuming that somehow the possible the set of possible beings is an arbitrary function on a real interval, has the same cardinality as that, but it can't be arbitrary. There has to be some kind of continuity involved for it to have any physical meaning at all, and that immediately reduces it to the possible functions on some countable dense subset. So you're already down to Beth 1 there rather than Beth 2.
Wait, okay, so
Because
sorry, go ahead.
So again, let me recapitulate. Aleph 0 is the same as Beth 0. It's the countable infinity. And if our universe is as it looks to us, even if it's infinite in extent, there's only going to be that many beings in the universe. Now, if we have a being that can be infinite in extent in some way, then the number of possibilities becomes the power set of that, or 2 to the Aleph 0, which is Beth 1. And that's the infinity, the same size as the real numbers. If you regard us as being continuous beings who have an existence in a manifold that involves the real numbers or some similar space as its base, then you can get a further level up, but only if you're dealing with completely arbitrary functions. And anything that has some kind of continuity of existence is determined by its values on some dense subset, which is countable. And so you're at least one level infinity too high there. But even assuming you're
maybe it would be helpful to just talk through the reasoning behind why I think. Well, so I think the number of people is way more than Beth 2, but let's talk about the reasoning for why it's at least Beth 2. So I think even if it was only Beth 1, the argument would still work, and I think the argument for it being Beth 1 is even that one's even more straightforward and incontrovertible. But okay, so I mean the reason I think it's Beth 2 is that you imagine slight variations of the world that vary so a field takes a value over points, and so you imagine the number of different possible fields, the number of different worlds that are otherwise identical and that merely differ in respect to the fields, and because the fields take value over points, the number of different possible fields is going to be Beth 2 because they're Beth 1 points, and so Beth 2 ways of rearranging them. So I think if you think that that the worlds are made up arrangements of points, or that there are possible fields that take values over points, then you get Beth 2 people.
Right, but a mathematical point is too small and doesn't really have an independent existence. You've really got measurable sets and equivalence classes where you regard things as equivalent if they differ, on some small set of points. And if you change just one real number, in some manifold, that's too tiny to make a difference. You need to have some kind of measure.
Wait, sorry, when you say it's too tiny to make a difference, like
some kind, and
wait, sorry, I think that we're having some connectivity.
You get.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I think there's maybe like a delay. But...
Right, but for example, you're probably familiar with the Banach-Tarski paradox.
I am not.
Okay, the Banach-Tarski paradox is dependent parts of space that have no connection to each other. Then there's a finite disassembly of a ball in that such that you can rearrange the pieces by rigid translations and rotations to make two balls. And this is, of course, very counterintuitive and unphysical. And there are many unphysical things like this. All of the theories of physics assume that the entities they're dealing with are defined in a much weightier way than just being points. And so you've got the point is much more an abstract location than a constituent.
Okay, so I agree that if things differ only with respect to a point, the worlds won't be substantially different. Like, it's not like any agent will have a different conscious experience or anything. But by definition, it'll be different if it differs with respect to at least one thing, namely the points that compose it. So long as you think that any world there are possible fields that take value over points, and that two worlds that differ with respect to the values of points differ, which just seems true by definition. If things differ in any respect that they differ, then you will get the number of possible worlds being at least Beth2. Now, the worlds, they'll all look very similar, right? So you won't get Beth2 worlds that look substantially different, but you will get two Beth2 distinct possible worlds.
Won't even be.
Sorry, you are cutting out a bit. I can't hear what you're saying. Yeah, wait, Joseph, I unfortunately can't hear you. Maybe try, like, I don't know, leaving and rejoining or something. Yeah, because it seems like you're having internet problems. Can people hear me? Like, can someone in the chat tell me if they can, who is it that's cutting out? Is it me or Joseph?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Yeah, Joseph, you are making interesting points. So I do want to hear more from you, but unfortunately, it seems like your connectivity is not good. So maybe try, I don't know, going somewhere else where there's better internet. In the meantime, hey, Max, do you want to raise some criticism? I do, by the way. Sure. I think that the case for Beth2, I think, is pretty good. But I actually think probably the case for unsettly many is if you want to argue it's at least Beth2, I think probably just the best arguments for that will just be arguments for it not being a set. But anyways, okay, sorry. Yeah, Max, go ahead.
So my objection would basically be right at the initial premise. I don't think that more people existing impacts the probability of me with my conscious experience existing. So, I mean, let's say, for example, you were to hypothetically create an infinite number of identical clones to me, which identical with me in every quality, then it would seem to me that this wouldn't change the probability of me existing with my conscious experience. Sure, there would be clones of me that would be identical to me in every respect, but they still wouldn't be me.
Right. So if there are two theories and they both say that you exist, right, then, okay, the theories do equally well. The point is, a theory saying that someone with your experience exists is not the same as the theory saying that you exist. Because, it could be that there's someone who has your experiences that exists, but that person is not you. For example, if, there was a person on the other side of the galaxy who existed, then that wouldn't be you. So, okay. So, okay, why think that you should think that there are infinite people from the fact that you exist? Well, so I give a bunch of arguments for this in the article. But here, let's just consider one case, okay? Let's say one person's created and they flip a coin. And if the coin comes up tails, then an extra 999 people get created. So suppose that you get created. And let's say the other people, they're clones of you up until the point that they learn their birth rank. Okay, so at some point, each person will be told their birth rank. But up until that point, they're clones. Okay, so you get created. Now, you adopt the view that basically a theory that says that there are more clones doesn't make your existence more likely. So as a result, you think that heads and tails are equally likely. And you think that conditional on the coin coming up tails, the odds are 1 in 1,000 that you'd be the first person. After all, if the coin comes up tails, there are 1,000 total people with your exact experiences, and you could be any of them. So now, let's say you find out that you're the first person. Each person will at some point be told their birth rank. You learn you're the first person. Well, now, if you reject the SIA, you get the result that now you get a 1,000 to 1 update in favor of the proposition that the coin comes up heads. If the coin comes up heads, then it's guaranteed that you'd be the first person. So you being the first person is 1,000 times likelier if the coin comes up heads than if it comes up tails. So for that reason, you get a 1,000 to 1 update in favor of the coin coming up heads. You were previously indifferent. So now, even though the coin hasn't been flipped yet and is a fair coin, you think at 1,000 to 1 odds that it will come up heads. And that's extremely counterintuitive. By changing the numbers around, you can make it so that the view implies that you should think at 1,000,000 to 1 odds or 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds that say you'll get 100 royal flushes in poker just by changing the numbers around. And it violates a principle of probability, which is that if there's some chancy event that's going to happen in the future, and no facts about the world are such that they're likelier if it will turn out in some way than another way, then your credence in it turning out some way will equal its objective probability. So if like the coin is going to be flipped in the future, and it's not like some oracle approached you and said, "Oh, it'll come up heads." You have no evidence that gives you that nothing about the world is likelier on the supposition it'll come up heads than tails. Then you should think of 50% chance that it'll come up heads and tails. So that's one argument for the SIA that I give in the post. So I guess where do you think that argument goes wrong?
I mean, the way I understand it, it's like the SIA, perhaps first, is that essentially the more people exist, the likelier maybe to take another approach. I don't see with our empirical evidence is that essentially tells us that only those people possibly exist which are created from other people. If
What?
Well, what it actually means says that there.
Like I agree that the way that people are produced is that other people have babies.
Basically, I went on a tangent there. It's like essentially our empirical observations of the world tell us that there is only a finite number of people. So if we want an argument for an infinite number of people to succeed, it must somehow be get to a point that's prior to our empirical observation. So we must somehow have such a high confidence in the argument that it allows us to reject our initial empirical.
I don't think any of this is right. First of all, I don't think it's right that our empirical evidence favors a finite universe. In fact, it seems like if you talk to a lot of physicists, what they say is that our empirical evidence favors the universe being infinite in size, where it doesn't, where you have to adopt some kind of weird physical assumptions in order to think that the universe has a finite size, because the sort of most natural model, it ends up involving it simply stretching on forever. And, there are all sorts of theories of quantum physics, like the many worlds interpretation and all sorts of multiverse views on which you get infinite people. So I don't think this is right at all. But even if it were right that our local universe is infinite in size, SIA, the anthropic argument doesn't disagree with that. It's not about the size of our local universe. It's about how many total people there are. So the idea is that God makes a giant multiverse of spatiotemporally disconnected universes, and he creates infinity of them. Now, if he does that, then there's no problem. That doesn't conflict with our empirical evidence at all. And in fact, if you buy SIA, it's the only thing consistent with our empirical evidence. The thing consistent with our empirical evidence that makes our empirical evidence infinitely likelier than the alternative assumption is that the universe is infinite. And now, if the universe is infinite, then in order to explain your existence, and your existence is an empirical fact that you observe about the world, then you need an infinite universe if SIA is right. So I disagree with everything that you said, but yeah, happy to hear your response.
I mean, I
want to be clear. The anthropic argument does not involve thinking that there are infinite people stuffed on Earth. What it says is there's a multiverse, and it does not conflict with our empirical evidence.
Okay. I guess in that case, the anthropic argument doesn't have to be overpower our empirical evidence if that's the case. But I still think there's the kind of identity relations are still I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some. Maybe there's some disanalogy between the example you provide in your article to argue in favor, or to argue against this objection. But yeah, I don't know.
I don't understand what your objection is.
Well, I mean, it's essentially even if an infinite number of people exist, there is or maybe to turn the other way around. If there's only one person, then there must be someone who's observing the world from that one perspective. So, and now if you have an infinite number of people, it would seem highly counterintuitive to me that this would in any way affect the chance of this person existing.
Okay, so hey Tim. So I explain why it does affect the chance of the person existing, which is if you take into account your uncertainty about who you are, then you just inevitably get the result that you update in favor of there being more people existing, right? So think about the case I gave, where one person's created, a coin is flipped, and if it comes up tails, the second person gets created. If you accept the odds you're the first person and the coin will come up heads equals the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails, and the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails, then tails ends up being twice as likely as heads. When you're precise about your uncertainty about which of the people you are, then the SIA result falls out. Now this will also apply to other scenarios involving SIA. Okay, so let's just consider a simple case. A coin gets flipped. If it comes up heads, one person gets created. If it comes up tails, 10 people get created. You get created from this. SIA will say tails is 10 times likelier than heads. Well, okay, so how might we argue for this? Well, let's give each of the people names. Okay, let's say the one person, just to make the names easy to remember. Let's give have their names all be numbers. So if the coin comes up heads, 1 will be created. That's the name of the person. And if it comes up tails, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 will be created. Now, if you so the argument for SIA is the odds that the coin came up heads and you are 1 equals the odds that the coin came up tails and you are 1, assuming you don't know your name, right? Because both of them predict 1 gets created. So if you know that that you are 1 and both theories predict 1 gets created, then it's indifferent between the two theories. But conditional on tails, the odds are only 1 in 10 that you're 1, because you could be any of the 10 people. And so for that reason, when you take into account your uncertainty about who you are, you end up getting a 10-1 update in favor of tails. And so tails is 10 times likelier than heads. By the way, I've now posted a link in the comments to the call-in link. So now I think people should be able to join with the link below.
Wouldn't this give rise to a kind of wouldn't it be possible? I mean, there are like other cases where you can apply a similar anthropic argument, for example, to make the case for reincarnation. But couldn't you?
Yeah, I think I think that the argument, whether it implies reincarnation, gets complicated because the cardinality of the number of person moments is the same, whether or not there's reincarnation. But if it turned out there were a finite number of people, then yes, SIA would give you reason to think there was reincarnation. And actually, Humer has an argument. He has an article called "Existence as Evidence of Immortality," where he lays this out in a kind of precise probabilistic way. And I just think it's basically right.
Yeah, I mean, my concern would just be that you could perhaps create a parody argument of that, where you get the SIA to predict that you exist in your in this precise moment in time for, well, not in this precise moment in time, but you have the exact perceptions of the world and think the exact thought that you are thinking right now for all eternity.
So I don't think it'll overall imply that. It will give you an update in favor of the theory on which there are. So what SIA tells you to think there are more of is people that you might presently be, or more precise, person stages that you might presently be. So like time slices that you might presently be. Now, it is true that a theory on which every single person has your exact present experience over and over again forever. This predicts it very well, but what it makes up in predicting that, it loses out in having a low prior, right? Because on the supposition that everyone has your exact experiences, that theory has a very, very low prior because everyone might have any of an infinite number of experiences. So the theory that everyone would have your exact experiences has a prior of 0. And so now it gets tricky to sort out how you compare a prior of 0 and infinite updates, but I don't think it'll make it so that you overall should conclude that.
But even if the prior is is extremely small,
I didn't say it. I said it was 0.
Well, why would you think that it would be precisely 0 and not just approaching 0 in probability?
The reason to think it's actually 0 is that there are an infinite number of conceivable experiences, and mine doesn't seem to be mine at the present moment doesn't seem to be special in any way that makes it likelier than any of infinity other experiences. Like you could imagine, my experience at the present moment is fairly unremarkable. And so you could imagine an infinite number of other ways. It's not clear if you get an infinite update. Really, the degree of the update will be, it gets messy with infinities, but it'll be it'll be the share of total experiences that are yours. The share of total experiences divided by the share of total experiences that are yours. That will be the degree of the update. Because a theory, suppose 1 in 10 experiences are exactly like yours at the present moment, then you'd get a 10-to-1 update in favor of thinking they're all like yours, because it makes it so that there are 10 times as many of your experiences at the present moment. So I don't think the view will overall get an update in favor of this.
You don't think you'd have an infinite update there? Like if there are infinite possible experiences and I've experienced finite experiences, that the ratio of that is infinite, right? Or
well, you experience finite experiences, but people that you might be throughout the universe, SIA gives you reason to think that there are infinite copies of you throughout the universe. So people that you might be will experience infinite things. Will have infinite experiences throughout the universe. Now it gets messy to compare these infinities. Infinite ethics, when you're SIA is very nice when you're comparing finite numbers, and it's very nice when you're comparing infinites that are of smaller cardinalities to infinites that are of bigger cardinalities, which just says you always prefer the one with the bigger cardinality. When you're comparing two infinites of the same cardinality, things get very messy. But this isn't unique to SIA. This is just a general fact. Oh shit.
Infinities are just annoying.
Yes, infinity ruins everything. I think David Manley, who he had a paper on this, where he had some line like that. So I know Joseph Shipman left, but he did leave some comments in the chat, so I guess I'll read them aloud and comment on them. And I want to catch up on some of the chat comments, but after that, I'll talk to you too in a moment. Okay, so Joseph in the chat says, he said, I moved closer to the router. I assume that is not the most interesting, he said. Okay, so he said, I think the major problem, which I was getting at too after the discussion of infinite sets, that it seems possible we are finite beings, which can be completely characterized by a finite amount of information, even if we live in a universe, which we describe using theories involved in mathematics of infinite sets. It takes an infinite amount of information to meaningfully specify a being. Your argument still holds. Note carefully that I said I specify and not identify. If we are finite beings and there are uncountably many instances of us, it takes infinite information to say which instance we are, but there are no differences between them. There's only finitely many information needed to describe any instance. Right. So I think it's true that to describe all the relevant goings on of the things that happen in our life, you probably only need finite information to specify it. But the point is the number of theoretically possible slight variations of you. Like imagine making a copy of you. Imagine copying the universe and then having a copy of you that just differs in regard to a particle in your foot. That's a possible universe. Imagine doing that again with an even smaller particle. That's another possible universe. The number of permutations of these particles is going to be Beth 1. And if you think that you don't just have particles in your foot, you can have fields in your foot, then you're going to get Beth 2 of them. Now, if you think, so long as you think that you can just keep cloning the universe any number of times, then you'll get that there's no possible set of all people, because suppose there were a set and suppose it was Beth 10. Well, you could make Beth 11 clones of the universe. And if you can make Beth 11 clones of the universe, then if there were only Beth 10 possible people, that would be impossible because you can't have more actual people than possible people. So what matters is not the number of people with distinct kinds of experiences. What matters on SIA is the number of people that are possible. That where if you make the biggest multiverse, how many people could there be that exist? They might be, you might have two people that are functionally identical. Wow, everyone's leaving.
Not me. I think actually by SIA up to that point you were saying that this point just now where it's about what happens when there's multiple instances of essentially the same person.
Okay, so yeah,
or not.
Yeah,
I think there's more one instance, two instances. You don't know which one you are. You just know by existing there is one existence of me at least. I don't know whether I should care whether there are multiple or not instances. I think there probably are. But SIA or not, I think the universe is probably infinite, and there are probably infinite number of people having my experience. But
okay, so the view you're inclined to, it's not actually SIA, it's called compartmentalized conditionalization. So what compartmentalized conditionalization says is that upon having some experience, what you should treat the relevant data as is just that your experience was had. So if there are two theories, it doesn't matter how many people have the experiences. All that matters is that the experiences are had by at least one person. Okay. And compartmentalized conditionalization is how, so it's a view I thought it seemed plausible when I first heard it.
But it has considered confused. So maybe I should read that article again and remind myself.
Yeah, it has the problem of being deeply crazy. Okay, so let me just describe one of the objections. Okay, let's imagine there are infinite clones of me throughout Hilbert's hotel, throughout Hilbert's hotel, and in every clone of me is in a room with a die, and it's a 1,000,000-sided die, and if it everyone rolls the die, and if it before they roll the die, before anyone got to this hotel, so a coin got flipped, and if it came up heads, all the dice were completely fair. They're all 1,000,000-sided. And if it came up tails, all the dice were rigged to get to always come up 485. Okay. So
the arbitrariness of the 485, but go on.
Yeah. So you roll your die, and it comes up 485.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like you get an update in favor of tails, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Compartmentalized conditionalization implies you don't get an update in favor of tails. After all, both heads and tails predict that your exact experience of getting 485 would be had, because there are infinite clones of you. So compartmentalized conditionalization implies that you don't get any evidence in favor of tails. So long as the number of people with your experience is not relevant.
Yeah. So it's also true that we know this other thing about the universe that we don't necessarily know here, right? This like two possible distributions of how things would be distributed in the world. We have something similar I guess I don't quite follow why we don't expect that update under compartmentalized. No, that's not true. So you're saying like no information you get should. Oh, are you still connected? Am I still? Yeah. You're saying that no information that I would expect anyway. No, that's not right. I'm trying to compare it to the Sleeping Beauty problem. Like, would compartmentalized conditionalization imply that thirding isn't correct, or?
So what compartmentalized conditionalization says in the Sleeping Beauty problem depends on exactly how the details are specified. So suppose that your experience on day 1 and day 2 are exactly the same, okay? Then compartmentalized conditionalization implies, whoa, I just got very pale. It implies that you should think heads and tails are equally likely, because both theories predict your experience would be had. The number of times they're had doesn't matter, and so it implies no update. If it comes up, if you'll have different experiences on day 1 and day 2, then it implies that you should get an update in favor of tails by a factor of 2, because the odds of your exact experiences being had are twice as high. Now, one other problem, compartmentalized conditionalization, it has a whole host of problems. One other problem is that it implies, it violates Bayesian conditionalization. Horrifying. How could something do that? And it violates it in Sleeping Beauty problem. Okay, so let's imagine that day 1 and day 2 in the Sleeping Beauty problem are going to be exactly the same, except after 4 hours, you'll learn what day it is. And so if you learn it's day 1, obviously, then at that point, the day starts to look different. Okay, you wake up. Both theories predict you waking up and having your experience for the first few hours. Okay, so you're 50-50. Then you learn that you're the first person. Well, you learning that you're the first person had a probability of 0.5, conditional on the coin coming up tails, while probability of 1 conditional on the coin coming up heads. So after you learn that you're the first person, it seems like you should get an update. But of course, both theories predict you waking up on day 1 and having the experience of waking up on day 1. So on compartmentalized conditionalization, after learning that it's day 1, in the version where it implies halving, after learning that it's day 1, you get no update in favor of thinking the coin came up tails, even though the odds of it being, in favor of thinking it came up heads, even though the odds of it being day 1 are twice as high if the coin comes up heads than if it comes up tails.
Huh. I'll have to think about that in writing, but that's in your piece, right, on compartmentalized conditionalization?
Yeah, but the most decisive, the biggest problem for compartmentalized conditionalization is that it implies skepticism. But the way it implies skepticism is kind of complicated. But it implies near certainty that you're a Boltzmann brain. That I don't explain in the piece. But if you send me a DM on Twitter, I read this objection in a paper. The objection is not original to me, but I have a paper where I make the case for SIA, including attacking the alternative views. Yeah, so I explained how to imply skepticism. But right, I mean, the view on which, so like, imagine that one person's created, then a coin's flipped, and if it comes up tails, then a clone of them gets created. The same argument that establishes SIA establishes that you should think there are multiple clones, where the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up heads equals the odds you're the first person and the coin will come up tails. And the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second clone and the coin has come up tails. And so you should think tails is twice as likely as heads. Same reasoning, you should think a theory on which there are infinite clones is infinite times likelier. And so this is why...
Yeah. I think that I do buy that you should think it's like 2/3 that it came up tails, you know, just knowing that you're one of the people who may be a clone or not, or whatever. I think that, I guess I haven't thought very carefully about this, but I think that, you know, we have this specification. There's a 50% chance the world works this way. There's a 50% chance the world works this way, you know, in this thought experiment. You know, in the real world, there's just like, there's, the world works one way, right? And that there's not this sampling. And I think that probably matters. I can't give a strong argument for it right now because I haven't really thought about it. But I think that's what I'm going to be thinking about while I read your argument on it.
I don't quite understand what you're saying it is that matters.
So, like, in the situation, it's like there's a 50% chance that there will be one person created, and if it comes up heads, and 50% chance, or if it comes up tails, it will be of one person and their clone created, right? And so, like, if you're in this world trying to figure out, like, well, which thing happened, you'll base your credence on the, you know, the chance that it would have come up heads or tails. In the real world, like, we don't necessarily know the nature of the universe, but it wasn't decided by a coin flip. Maybe the laws of nature mean that, like, clones couldn't be created or something, and so then maybe updating your credence based on thinking that was the model of the world would
right. So I mean, the idea is just that the coin flip case gives us a nice way of isolating factors, where if you want to figure out, like, you know, if you want to figure out probabilities, artificial scenarios with coins are helpful ways of doing it because they can make the probabilities more precise. There's a reason that, you know, in math problems, when you're learning probability in school, you don't have some like really complicated and confusing scenario. Like, you'll try to have a simple scenario involving coin flips. But I mean, the same basic points will apply to scenarios where not involving coin flips. So, for example, suppose we have two theories. Theory one is there's one universe. Theory two is there's a big multiverse. And let's say the one universe is the same on theory one and theory two. Well, the odds that you're on theory one, let's assume they have equal priors. The odds you're on theory one and let's say the second theory says there are 1,000 universes. The odds that you're in theory one, you're in universe one and theory one's right, equals the odds that you're in theory one and universe two's right, assuming it's the same universe. And conditional on theory one, the odds are only 1 in 1,000. I mean, sorry, conditional on theory two, the odds are only 1 in 1,000 that you're in universe one. And so theory two gets 1,000 is 1,000 times likelier. Like the coin flip scenarios, the point is it just illustrates the degree of the update. And so if you get a 10-to-1 update on theories on which there are 10 more people, then in a coin flip case where tails predicts 10 times as many people as heads, then you'll think tails is 10 times likelier than heads. But so the point is to sort of isolate the degree of the update, but the same basic points will apply to other scenarios. Or like, you know, take one other argument I give for SIA, which I think I hadn't realized this argument until fairly recently, and I just think it's devastating. So the way SIA reasons is the way any view of anthropics that's plausible will reason if you know that there are lots of people other than you. Okay, so let's consider, you know, a coin flip case. 5 minutes ago, a coin got flipped. If it came up heads, one person got created. If it came up tails, 1 million people got created. And let's say they were all clones of me. Let's say they're all clones of me with my exact experiences. SIA says tails is 1 million times likelier than heads. But any view of anthropics, now imagine this experiment keeps being repeated, right? So every 1,000 years, every million years since the start of the universe, this experiment has been repeated. Each time a different coin is flipped, If it comes up heads, one person got created. If it comes up tails, a million people get created. Well, now everyone agrees with compartmentalized conditional, with SIA, Freudian slip, because now everyone thinks that tails is a million times likelier than heads, or roughly a million times likelier than heads. As for every person who's created by the heads coin flips, there are about a million people who are created by the tails coin flips. And so what this means is that on views other than SIA, if you want to figure out if a coin was flipped 5 minutes ago that created one person of heads and a million of tails, you need to figure out what people were doing regarding coin flips before the time of the dinosaurs. Now, I applied this to the coin flip case, but the same point will apply to any case where you're applying SIA, right? So let's imagine that. So consider the dread. So like one result of SIA is, suppose this is the only universe. You should think it's infinite in size. Well, now imagine there was another universe that was infinite in size. Well, now everyone agrees with SIA that you should think that that this universe is infinite in size. After all, if this universe is only finite in size, then if you exist, it's infinitely unlikely that you find yourself here. Yeah. So once you conclude that once you conclude there's another universe that's infinite in size, now everyone agrees with SIA. So as long as you think that your credence in the size of this universe doesn't depend on what else is happening in the multiverse, how many people there are in some different universe, then you just inevitably get the SIA results. You inevitably get the degree of update from SIA. Oh, hey, Daniel Gallagher. I don't know why I said Daniel's full name, but nice seeing you. Yeah. So there are people who leave very confused comments, and I find that annoying. But then there are also people who leave interesting and insightful comments, and that's always fun. And Daniel is one of the people who leaves interesting and insightful comments.
Oh, that's very good. Well, you should invite him in. He's still in the waiting room.
Yeah. He's not here. He's just leaving. He's just leaving comments.
Gotcha.
But
I wonder what you think about this situation. You're talking about the universe versus multiverse. Let's say you have, I described kind of a way in which it seems to me you could make a reasoning error in this. So say you start with this prior that, okay, 50% chance I'm in a finite universe, 50% chance I'm in an infinite multiverse, each with finite universes, right? Well, under SIA, I should kind of make an infinite update there, right? Because there'll be infinitely more copies of me or anyone in this multiverse. What if it turns out that like multiverses just are not metaphysically possible for a reason that I didn't consider, and that there must necessarily be one universe? But in that case, like there's only one metaverse or universe, and by SIA I've updated to be absolutely confident that there's more than one universe.
Well, I think by SIA reasoning, if you think that a multiverse is metaphysically impossible for some reason, then SIA will just give you an update against thinking that. Right? So like SIA, there are different ways of construing SIA, but I don't think it should be construed as just theories on which a larger share of possible people are likelier. So imagine you're a necessitarian. So you think everything that happens is necessary. And suppose we're considering like SIA shouldn't like theories on which necessitarianism is true and there are 7 people on the grounds that every possible person exists. Because the point is, even if every possible person exists, there's still a sense in which it's surprising that you exist. Just like even if you're a necessitarian, if a person gets 10 royal flushes in a row, you say, okay, look, I know it's necessary that you'll get 10 royal flushes in a row, but it's still surprising. I know it's necessary on your view, but it's still surprising that is necessary out of all the things that could have been necessary. And so if we consider, like, suppose you have a credence of 0.1 in a multiverse being possible. Well, then just exactly the same updating scheme that I gave before will favor thinking that a multiverse is actual. Right. So imagine
an infinite update in favor of multiverses being possible.
Right. Because so suppose there are 2 theories. Theory 1 is there's a single universe, and that's the only possible thing. That has a prior of 0.9. And theory 2 is that there's an infinite multiverse, and you have infinite universes. And let's say the universes start from, so the theory 1 says there's just universe 1. Theory 2 says there are universes 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., all the way to.
Yeah.
Well, the odds that you're in universe 1 are equal between theories 1 and 2. Both of them make equal probability that you'd be in universe 1. And one way to see that is that you could imagine that what determines if there's the multiverse is a coin flip. And then if you don't accept that it's equally likely, then you get credence of more than 0.5 and a fair coin coming up heads. So if you're in universe 1, then you should be indifferent between two theories. But conditional on theory 2, the odds are 0 that you're in universe 1. So overall, the theory 2 probability space just eats 100% of the probability space.
Yeah, if you know specifically like the bounds of the thought experiment, if you're in universe 2, then you know that you're in the multiverse world, right?
Right. The idea is if you know you're in universe 1, then you're indifferent between the two. Or actually, you think theory 1 is 9 times likelier than theory 2. Because of the priors.
Yeah. I think the case that we're more in is one where you're not sure which, of the universes you are, but
right.
I do think that's useful.
Right. Well, you don't have to know what universe you're in. The point is just probabilistic. So the odds that you're in universe 1 and theory 1's true are 9 times higher than the odds that you're in theory that theory 2 is true and you're in universe 1. And the odds that theory 2 is true and you're not in universe 1 are infinitely higher than the odds that you are in theory 2 and in universe 1. So overall, theory 2 ends up getting 100% of the probability space.
Yes, at least under SIA, right?
Well, I mean, so just which of the steps do you think go wrong? Do you agree that if you?
I'm not sure. The steps make sense to me, but I don't know if I like. Should I use SIA to change my view on what is possible to exist in the universe? I don't know. Like, if I know something is possible, SIA seems very good at updating my likelihoods of like which possible outcome I'm in. But I'm not sure how I should feel about whether it should change my view about what is possible or not. And I guess I don't have.
Actually, in the post, I do have a section called "What if I think there are only Aleph null people" or something.
In your new ultimate guide.
Yeah. Section 4.3. I address this.
I do think that was a very good idea putting together that post, by the way, because sometimes
thank you.
Things and they're spaced out over a few of your articles. Guide, which I only read the 3.4 section. So I'm also running away from work.
Wait, sorry, your audio just got kind of bad.
Oh, can you still hear? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's better. I don't know what happened. As if by magic. But yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically, it seems what happened is that no one read the article, and then everyone left comments of the form either here's something that's really confused, well, like their comments were either really confused or their comments were interesting, but they were addressed in the article. But I mean, often people would leave a comment saying something that was addressed in the article, and then I would point them to where it was addressed in the article, and then they'd have interesting things to say. So it wasn't entirely fruitless. But I mean, maybe it's not so surprising that people don't read, 15,000 words, the size of 50 pages or something. Let's see, how many? It was 13,000 words to
your article is much longer than that.
I typed in 1,300. Wait, okay. Google informs me that 13,000 words is roughly 3 pages. I don't think this is right.
No, that's not right.
13,000 over 500 is, okay, it's about 26 pages. That's not that long. You can read 26 pages. Late night. That's an interesting way to deflect criticism. You didn't read it. Well, often the criticism would be, oh, what do you make of this objection? And then I would have a section about, here's what's wrong with this objection. So, yeah, okay, I guess I'll go through the chat and respond to the comments there. Okay. Johnny asks if it leads to modal realism. Okay, this is one example. CF 4.6. What about modal realism? Is CF the right term? I forget. But yeah, so I address modal realism. In short, I think the argument, it gives you an update in favor of modal realism, but I think modal realism has other huge problems. In particular, I think modal realism undermines induction, and that's unacceptable. So
you mean like that there are like induction only, like we can't justify it. We can only see that it does work because the past seems to act like the future. You're saying we don't have reason to expect the future should be like the past.
yeah, I think if modal realism is true, then we shouldn't think that the sun will rise tomorrow. No, I mean, well, actually, obviously, if I became a modal realist, I would drop that judgment. But I think the best view says that modal realism is incompatible with being confident the sun will rise tomorrow. Okay, and yeah, I don't think you want to combine theism with modal realism, but I don't think it favors theism. I think it probably favors theism over modal realism, because modal realism, they both predict every possible person exists, maybe, or at least the sprite cardinality people. And then modal realism probably predicts most of them having like scattered, psychophysically disharmonious, chaotic consciousnesses. And theism predicts most of them having like nice, orderly consciousnesses. So overall, I think your experience gives you evidence for theism over modal realism, and modal realism has just like intolerable problems. Okay, Reflective Journey says, I will still maintain that indexical is ambiguous in the argument. That is the problem, MO. I find that sentence to be ambiguous. I mean, the point is, you're sometimes uncertain about indexical facts. So an indexical fact is a fact that's not about the world, it's about your place in the world, right? So imagine there's one copy of you in a warehouse in California and one copy of you in a warehouse in Maryland. You might know every fact about the world. There's a Tim Duffy in California and Tim Duffy in Maryland, but you're unaware of the indexical fact of which one you're in. And so the point is so in the case of SIA, part of the update involves thinking about the indexical facts. So like the odds, you take into account your uncertainty that you are the first person versus you being the second person. Okay, Faze was asked, do I believe in an infinite afterlife? Yes, I think once you think God exists, then you should think there's an infinite afterlife. It would be weird if he had the afterlife just stop after like 100,000 years or something, or if like there was no afterlife when an afterlife is good. Okay, Name asks, why do great and important videos and live streams about whether or not God exists and veganism and whatnot like this have so few views, but garbage, music, TV, etc., so many views? Seems suspicious. I agree. I think this is an underrated version of the problem of evil. Okay. Well,
framing that as a version of the problem of evil is very funny.
Okay. Marple says, hey, Matthew, saw your comment on Cameron's video. Was wondering what your comments were on the multiverse explanation of fine-tuning. Have your views changed? I thought you thought it didn't explain it. So I agree that if there's a multiverse, then... So, like, okay, my thoughts on a multiverse is there are certain problems with the multiverse theory. Like, I think the multiverse pushes fine-tuning back a level because it's improbable that you would get a universe generator. I think...
Multiverse, do you mean, like, the many worlds interpretation, or just that there are an infinite number of universes? Or
so by a multiverse, it just the theory that there are a bunch of universes.
Okay, yeah.
So Everett, though I think Everett Many Worlds is supposed to not solve fine-tuning, because I think all the worlds share the basic structure of our world. So like there are all sorts of problems with the multiverse theory, but where like I think there is a multiverse, but I think if you think there's a multiverse, you should be a theist, because I think the best explanation of a multiverse is theism. I think theism provides a nice explanation for why there might be a multiverse. I think that theism avoids like one element of fine-tuning is it seems like there's fine-tuning. Robin Collins has argued for this, and I don't know if this is right. Apparently, there's disagreement. I talked to Aaron Wall recently, who's a very smart Christian physicist, and he doesn't think there's fine-tuning for discoverability, but it's at least plausible that there is.
What do you think is the probability of having a multiverse under non-theism?
I don't know exactly. Maybe like 1 in 1,000, but
okay.
But yeah, Marple. So I mean, the point is. So Cameron's video, he tried to like apply Bayes' theorem to theism versus atheism, which is a good thing to do. I think you should do that. And in fact, one of the things that convinced me of theism was I just put everything into a Bayes spreadsheet, and like even with very conservative numbers, theism just came out like hundreds of thousands of times likelier than atheism. Now, obviously, your credence in theism shouldn't be 100,000 times it in atheism.
Yeah, I'm unsure what to make of that kind of calculation. In part, you're like using these huge numbers, and a small difference can mean like I'm 1,000x confident of this versus the other thing, and that there has to be at least something incorporating parameter uncertainty when you make
Yeah.
like that. I don't know what it needs to be done to make it work, but
Yeah, so
calculations like that are outrageous.
Yeah, so you don't want to take it too seriously. Like, you don't want it to think like, okay, the numbers say this, this is going to be my credence, right? You definitely don't want to say that. But if you find that basically no matter how you assign the numbers, assuming you do it in a non-crazy way, theism comes out on top, that's at least informative. Like,
yeah, if you take like your lower bound estimate on all the factors.
Yeah, but I mean, so I like that Cameron did that. But what I found kind of unreasonable was that just the numbers he was putting on were like just insane. I thought, like he had the odds of order on atheism. Oh, hey Dan, how are you?
Hey, good, thanks. How's it going?
Yeah, the odds of order on atheism were like completely insane. Like, I mean, it was just ridiculous. Yeah, like
Toby Ord's paper on the Fermi paradox.
Have I read whose paper on the Fermi paradox?
Your comment there first, but I might kind of digression, but
yeah, wait, Dan. For some reason, okay, I got your name confused with a Substack commenter. You are a different person from that Substack. Let's see, who is the person I got your name confused with?
I am very offended by that.
Yeah. Yeah, who was it? Yeah, I don't know why that is.
Are they like me in any other way, or is it just?
I think they're. Let me see. Who was it? Yes, but you're also insightful. You don't leave Substack comments, but were you to leave Substack comments, I'm sure they would be insightful. But Substack comments based on our conversation.
Maybe I'll stop.
Let's see who is it that I got you confused with? Oh, I got you confused with Daniel Greco. Okay.
Close enough.
Yeah. But okay, so yeah, I mean, I found like I like the approach from Cameron, where I think you should actually try to assign numbers to these things. But I just found the numbers substantively crazy. Like he put like 1 in a trillion odds of fine tuning given atheism. These are not like conditional on atheism. You should not think that the odds are 1 in a trillion of fine tuning. You basically never get a 1 trillion to 1 Bayes factor in favor of anything. I think like maybe you get a 1,000 to 1 update from fine tuning or something, taking into account the a priori fine tuning, but definitely not like the numbers just seem kind of silly to me. But there were some numbers where like not only did I disagree with the numbers, I disagreed with the sign. So he would say, this is a 100,000 to 1 update. And I think, no, it's actually a 10 to 1 update in favor of atheism or something. And so if you think there's a 1 in a million chance I'm right about this, then you have to think that your all things considered evaluation of the numbers has to be different. But okay.
I'm kind of skeptical of that type of analysis in general. I think it suffers from kind of the same problem as people have with the Drake equation and the problem of why don't we see aliens. People plug in the numbers they think are best, and it's like, oh, we should see 100,000 other alien civilizations. But Toby Ord and Eric Drexler and Andrew Sandberg, I think, wrote a paper. They're like, okay, here's what we think the probability distribution is for each of these parameters. And if we assume these are independent, which I think is kind of a reasonable assumption at least, and then you kind of multiply those distributions, you get this range of probability estimates. And a lot of that density is like probability distribution across a number of alien civilizations you expect to see. And a lot of that probability density is in areas where you don't expect like any aliens. So I think that when you're doing this kind of Bayesian analysis, if you're not accounting for that parameter uncertainty, you're going to end up with like a vastly overconfident result. So uncertainty in like how big of an update you make, right? You want to say like, okay, maybe this is between 100 to 1 this way and 5 to 1 the other way or something like that.
Yeah, like I agree. You don't want to take these too literally. But if you just notice, basically, no matter how you set the numbers, one theory comes out on top, then this is somewhat informative.
Yeah, I do think that's right. And like you were saying that if you use kind of values from one end of the distribution of updates you think are correct, then that should get you a reasonable result. But I also think that there's a lot of bias that goes into even coming up with what you think a reasonable range of how strong the evidence is.
Yeah. I mean, I think the basic point is just, it seems like there's a lot more evidence for theism than atheism. The evidence for atheism is basically evil and hiddenness. And hiddenness isn't much evidence once you conditionalize on evil. So really, it's just basically evil. And the evidence for theism is like 20 things. And so once you have a kind of, and these things, they're not completely independent, but they're like largely independent. Like it's not that, like whatever the explanation is of why, say, there's consciousness, it's not that likely that that'll explain, say, like fine tuning or the anthropic data or something. And so once you,
if the explanation is that like idealism is true, it explains all those, right?
Why does idealism predict uncountably infinite people existing?
Oh, sorry, I didn't. You were saying consciousness and.
Oh, sorry, consciousness and fine tuning. Yeah.
So fine tuning isn't a problem if there's only consciousness, because then there won't be like space with no consciousness, because consciousness is like all there is.
I don't think like even if you think idealism's right and that it's just consciousness, like the consciousness, it at least behaves in ways where it looks like it's supported by a physical world. And so then the puzzle is that the physical world that it looks like it's supported by has constants that fall in this narrow range. Like even if what idealists want to say is that something like, yes, the world is just consciousness, but you have big consciousness that behaves in ways like we normally think matter does. And so if that's true, then you just get the normal fine-tuning problem. Max and Dan, do you have any objections to the anthropic argument, SIA?
I mean, so I have no objections to SIA, really. I think I've been more or less convinced that that's the best way of looking at anthropics. I guess I wanted to ask you, like, I guess there's two things, but I'll start with one of them. So, like, do you think there are any other hypotheses other than like God that could explain, Beth to people? And also, where do you get like all the aspects of God from, given like, yeah? So I accept there's Beth to people, and then like where do you get like God's goodness and everything from after that? Or are you not trying to do that with the anthropic argument?
Okay, so the first question, I think there are views other than SIA that can get the right number of people, but I think those views have other problems. So like modal realism gets you the right number of people. Tegmark's view, I think, gets you the right number of people, but I'm not sure. The math, it's something that's hard to think about. Tegmark's view, by the way, is that every mathematical structure is instantiated. I think there's no set of mathematical structures, but I'm not positive.
I mean, there's almost certainly no set of mathematical structures, right? It can't be, surely not.
Yeah, but it might be that the collection, but it's not obvious if the kinds of mathematical structures that could describe a world, if there's a set of those.
Yeah, I need to think about it more, but okay, fine.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think, yeah, probably you'll get the right number. But I think those views undermine induction, because if there are infinite people, there are infinite people both deceived and non-deceived, and no plausible story on which most people are not deceived. Well, with theism, you can say probably I'm not deceived, because for every particular person, God is flourishing maxing. God puts them in a world ideal for their flourishing. And the odds that my flourishing is achieved by me being massively deceived are low. Like, if God just created me, I would think the odds are low that the world ideal for my flourishing would be involve me being massively deceived. Same inference goes through if you accept SIA. Or the same inference goes through if you think God creates lots of other people. So, okay, then the second question is, okay, where do we get God's properties from? Well, of course, the way we get God's properties is we start with some ill-defined, like Thomistic voodoo, and then you have 13 like very confusing steps involving where with like 3 uses of the word essence per sentence, where it's like the essence in the thing subsuming the essence of another must draw it from it. Therefore, you need okay. So I think the way you get to God being morally perfect is you want God to be simple. And so here's one very simple hypothesis, and I claim this is going to be the only simple viable hypothesis. It's that you have a mind that's completely without limit, an unlimited consciousness. Now, if you have a consciousness where there's something it can't do, or where it doesn't know something, there's something outside of its awareness, that's a limit on it. It's restrained in some way. So you think of theism as the idea that there's this limitless consciousness. And then with a limitless consciousness, awareness, being aware of every fact and being able to do anything comes for free. So you get omniscience and omnipotence, especially if you think consciousness and will are bound up together. So you have an unlimited will, okay, that entails being omnipotent. And then once you think that there's an unlimited will, that there's an omniscient and omnipotent being, the path to omnibenevolence is that there's a plausible view that if you come to understand that something is right, then you'll be motivated to follow it if you're perfectly rational and have no contrary psychological inclinations. So even Parfit argues for this, where he says, that, reductionism about personal identity is true. There's no more reason to care about someone else than you. So he says, yourself than someone else. So he says that caring about yourself rather than other people, this is sort of like being indifferent to your suffering on a future Tuesday. It's irrational. So if we buy this, then once you get a being of limitless knowledge and awareness and rationality and power, then the default is just it having perfectly moral motivations. Now, with any other worldview, you have to arbitrarily build in specific motivations to it, and then that will end up being very complicated.
Yeah, so I mean, someone who buys like humanism about psychology is not going to buy the last part of your explanation there. But also, I guess you sort of already answered the omnibenevolence thing earlier by saying that the kind of God that you need is a God that is not going to lead to induction being undermined, and therefore the God that you're updating towards when you use the Anthropic argument is going to be one that allows induction to work well, and that seems like at least some kind of benevolence there, So if that's kind of God that you're getting off the ground there, I'm not too worried about the extra steps there. I can see that you're getting evidence for a benevolent God in particular because of the induction thing. But I think that means that one of the key premises of your argument here is that induction works, and I think maybe you should flag that more when you're presenting this.
The way I think about it, so yes, I agree that the point about induction is a good one. I agree that the way I think about it is there's a stage 1 argument and a stage 2 argument. So the stage 1 argument is just the world is such that it contains at least Beth 2 people, probably much more. And then the stage 2 argument is, and from this, and this is what all men know to be God. This is what all men call God. And so it tries to get to the divine attributes. So I think even if you don't trust induction, the first step will at least update you in favor of theism by knocking out nearly all non-theistic competitors. Now, regarding the point about humanism, right? So if you're certain of humanism, then you won't think the argument works because, I think maybe you can still get to humanism, get to a good God by the route you described about trusting induction, but you won't get as a route towards the simple God. But all you need is it to be plausible that humanism is false. So all you need is there to be some reasonable credence that understanding the moral facts will motivate you to follow them if you're perfectly rational and you know everything, you grasp every truth. All you need is some non-trivial credence in that in order for the argument to work, because the other really complicated and gerrymandered versions of theism where you build in some specific psychology to God and then this hurts both the simplicity and the elegance of God. These views have a low enough prior that even if you have a low credence in humanism, I think it'll sort of vacuum up most of the probability space.
I see. And then you're objective Bayesian about priors and stuff, right? As well, or is that it? Or what's your...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah, seems consistent. Not sure I completely agree, but I accept that you're consistent.
That's a common reaction that I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Okay, Max Brandner. Brandner. That's hard to say. How's it pronounced? Brandner?
Brandner.
What?
Brandner. It's from. I think the origin is like from Austria.
Okay, I was way off. Okay, so you had some objections earlier. I assume you have more?
Actually not. At least not to SIA. Yeah. I mean, to what you just said, would you do you just accept modal collapse then, if you think that like God acts perfectly?
I think God's probably contingent. So, I think that I don't accept modal collapse for that reason. And I think there's some contingency to what he creates, right? So like probably there's no uniquely best world for God to create. Probably there are, like, if you imagine two worlds and they just differ with respect to like the color of the grass or something, these seem like they're probably going to be equally good worlds. So like in certain cases. So I think that God has freedom to choose between those worlds, and I think we have free will. So I think that introduces contingency to the world. But yeah, I don't like, one thing that lots of theists think is they think God is basically free to create or not to create, and that it's just sort of like, we got lucky that he created. And I don't think this is right at all. I think that necessarily a being with God is free to create in the sense that he could fail to create if he wanted to, but he's perfect, so he would never want to because creating is good.
Yeah, and then I think there are other arguments for theism that work, but with fine-tuning in particular, one issue I have with this is the potential of there being being explained by physical necessity. So let's say like tomorrow physicists discovered some law or something that explains why the cosmological constant has the exact value which it has, and not any other of the range of values that it can have of the knowledge we possess right now. I mean, sure, you could say that it's you cannot really like deal with it in terms of with this eventuality in probabilistic terms, but well, there are plenty of other examples of fine-tuning arguments historically, where we now know of explanations to these things.
Yeah, so it's true that there are arguments, kinds of fine-tuning arguments that people have made historically where we found the explanation for them. But it's not so clear that there have been any ones that were good historically, where like many of the popular kinds of fine-tuning don't actually seem to be very convincing. So it's not actually clear that the kinds of fine-tuning have been reduced. And in particular, it's not clear that any real kind of fine-tuning has gone away. In particular, it does seem like we're discovering more and more kinds of fine-tuning over time. So the inductive trend is in the opposite direction. Now, so your explanation is like, maybe it'll be explained by deeper physics. We'll come up with some deeper physics explanation that explains it away. But the point is, the deeper physics explanation is deficient for two reasons. The first one is that even if you have a deeper physics explanation, it becomes improbable that the deeper physics explanation would set it to that value out of all the values it could set it to. Right? So imagine you're in Vegas. The person gets 10 royal flushes in a row, and you're like, okay, I think you're cheating. And they say, no. Deeper physics explains. The ultimate laws of physics, when you work them out, explain why I got 10 royal flushes in a row. Well, no one would find that convincing, because it's so unlikely that the deeper laws of physics, when explained, would get that particular value out of all the values it might get. So similarly, it's conceivable that deeper physics would get any value of the cosmological constant. So it's so improbable that the deeper physics would get the particular value that it does. There's also, regarding the Higgs mass and the cosmological constant, in both of those cases, there's a reason to think deeper physics can't explain it, so what the cosmological constant needs to be to be fine to sustain life, to sustain complex structures, depends on the value of other forces. So as long as you think that the value of the cosmological constant doesn't depend, that what the value is set by doesn't depend on like how much mass there is in the universe, right? This sort of anti-teleological principle that what the cosmological constant is set to doesn't depend on what it needs to be set to in order to get fine-tuning, then it's super improbable that it gets set to this number. There can't be an explanation.
I wouldn't buy that assumption though. Like, it seems plausible that if there is deeper physics, it involves connection between many of those constants. Like, I don't think the probability of that is necessarily that high, but it does limit how much I'm willing to update on a.
Well, so like with the cosmological constant, so there are all sorts of forces pulling in all sorts of directions, governing expansion, governing contraction.
Yeah.
And all these forces combined result in a low expansion rate. So an analogy is that I think John Hawthorne and Yoav Isaacs gave in a paper or something, is like, okay, imagine you take the economy of Micronesia, you divide it by 4,000, and you divide it by 10,000 or something, and you subtract Bill Gates's annual spending from it. And the amount that you end up with is $9. This would be very surprising, assuming that imagine there's some reason why on one hypothesis it might be $9. Well, that would be really good evidence for the hypothesis, because it's so unlikely that all these forces would cancel out to this very low but nonetheless positive level. And so similarly, it's if you think that like it isn't enough for there to be a deeper assumption about the values of the constants being connected to each other. It has to be that the value that the cosmological constant is set to, in part, depends on like how all the other things in physics collectively interact together throughout the entire universe, and that's very unlikely. Like that requires basically the value of the cosmological constant being set at, like depending in some way on like how much mass there is in the universe, how much density, what the force of gravity is, and so on. Like there are all these other things that affect the cosmological constant, and it's so unlikely that by chance they would roughly cancel out. The same point is true of the Higgs mass, though I didn't understand the physics there as well to talk intelligently about it. But the Higgs mass, yeah, the same basic point applies. This is why, by the way, like I talked with Aaron Wall, and he thinks that the kinds of really impressive fine-tuning are basically the cosmological constant and the Higgs mass, because these are the ones where deeper physics is not going to be able to.
Maybe there's some other constant, and if you add in this other constant, instead of being a very small value, it's 0. And maybe the universes that can exist are all the values for which that value is 0. That sounds like a way the universe could be. It doesn't sound like a likely one, but.
Well. But so remember, the cosmological constant is just how it governs how rapidly the universe expands. So we know that there's not some other constant which, when combined with it, goes to 0 because the universe is expanding. Right. We know there isn't some deeper physics explanation that makes the universe not expand because the universe is in fact expanding.
Well, yeah, maybe the cosmological constant plus, something that seems unrelated is what sums to 0, or maybe, right? That's just something I think is like less arbitrary than that small figure.
Well, but what I mean, no matter what the value of the cosmological constant is, it could have been that there's something else whose value with it sets to 0. And so if you distribute your credence across the possible values of the cosmological constant, it could still be anything. And so this won't raise the probability of a finely tuned value of the cosmological constant.
So I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe there's some symmetry or some restriction on which universes can exist such that it's a mathematical truth of all of them that they expand at a slow rate. I just don't see it easy.
But I mean, what we know is that what determines how quickly they expand is like the mass of the universe, the cosmological constant, like the amount of dark energy or something. I don't know physics
Like, if we rely on dark energy, like there's necessarily plenty of uncertainty in there, right?
Right, but so we know that like there are a series of forces, and together these are what lead to expansion. And so it's not like there can just be some unified explanation of why, of why necessarily it expands at a slow rate. That unified it would have to be that there's some unified thing that sets the value of the cosmological constant so that it results at a slow rate. Now, I think there is something like that, known as God. I think God sets the value of the cosmological constant to be that. But so long as you think that the value what the value of the cosmological constant is set to doesn't depend on like what it has to be set to have a slow rate of expansion, then it's improbable that you'd get that value of the cosmological constant.
Maybe just if I don't think that like a fine-tuning argument just flat out doesn't work. I think when it comes to serving as an explanation for the physical laws, I think it might potentially fail. Because at least it seems to me that it's at least plausible that the physical laws might be necessarily the way they are. For example, take laws of gravity. That we see that there is like a clear analogy between them and certain rules about geometry, and maybe there are like a certain less intuitive forms of mathematical relations that lead you to the conclusion that perhaps the cosmological constant is necessarily of the value of which it is.
No, but that's like saying that the person who gets the 10 royal flushes in poker necessarily gets their value as a result of either necessitarianism or deeper physics. Where yes, maybe they necessarily get that value, but there are all sorts of values you could imagine them necessarily getting. So it won't raise the probability of them getting the value. By the way, I don't think the point about gravity is true. I don't think gravity is an instance of real fine-tuning. I've heard both Aaron Wall.
Balance between gravity and the cosmological constant. That you think gravity being 10% different?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it works. I've just heard physicists that I trust say that gravity is not. I think I heard Robin Collins say this, and I also heard Aaron Wall say this.
Yeah, I mean, with gravity, all I was referring to is really the fact that it is that ultimately it's divided by r squared, which is analogous to the surface area of a sphere. If it turns out that the cosmological constant is necessarily of the value of which it is, although we do not currently have any indication that this is the case, it seems that at least in principle for physical laws, this kind of that things could reduce to kind of a necessity where it just depends on a certain logical relation being true. But yeah, I mean, this would still not explain other forms of fine-tuning, like the amount of mass to energy, or why there's exactly as much mass as there is, because that isn't like an that isn't as abstract. It's like somewhat different. Yeah, I mean, it could be that I'm like over-leveraging.
Yeah, I mean, so it may be. I mean, I guess I don't. It doesn't seem like there's a plausible route towards establishing that say that the existence of the cosmological constant is necessary, the way it might be for gravity. But certainly, its precise value, which is this very arbitrary parameter, where like it's not like it takes on some nice, elegant mathematical thing. it's like, set to this seemingly very arbitrary parameter.
As far as we can tell.
And just like, yes, there could be a deeper explanation of that. You could think it's necessary, but there also could be a deeper explanation in terms of physics of the person getting 10 royal flushes in poker. You shouldn't think that there's a deeper explanation of that because it's so unlikely that the deeper explanation could explain any particular value. So it's unlikely that the deeper explanation would set it to that value out of all the values that it might be. So the same point applies here. And for the reasons I described, but for the other reason I described, it seems like a deeper physics explanation won't be plausible. There is more complicated physics stuff, I think, that rules out the plausibility of a deeper explanation, but I don't understand it very well to say much about it. But I think the conceptual point is perfectly fine. That just like,
I don't know much to say about fine tuning, but I do have something else to sort of ask you about. So I'm happy to wait until the fine tuning discussion is over. I just wanted to flag.
No, I think we mostly covered the relevant points.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you, Matthew, like, so how many conscious subjects do you think inhabit your head at the moment?
I don't know. I think probably either one or infinity.
Okay. You don't think like, for each sort of plausible combination of particles making up your brain, there's like, they could be distinct.
So I guess maybe it would be so either one infinity or a lot.
Because I was wondering that there might be SIA reasons to prefer theories that predict lots of them.
Infinite subjects even within your own head.
That might be. Though I think once you think every possible person gets created, it doesn't really matter how many of them are in my head. It doesn't matter how they're distributed.
Well, it does matter a bit, right? Because it sort of fucks up our intuitive ethics, right? Especially if you're consequentialist, especially if the answer is lots and not infinite, right? Because then suppose that I've got a really big head, right? And you have a massive head, and I'm a sort of like a totalist utilitarian here. Do my interest in the matter like a lot more because there's just many more subjects in my head than in your head, or like what are we doing here?
Yeah, it could be 1% more brain matter gives you a billion times more connections, or possible sets of neurons. That means a billion times many subjects.
It's possible that this is right, but my credence in it, like, there are all sorts of possible stories.
Why is your credence in it so low?
It seems like a weird way for God to do it. I don't know. It seems kind of. I haven't thought enough about it, but it seems kind of counterintuitive. Let me
it
doesn't like the way it might work.
Let me give you like a sort of first principles way of looking at it, right? So suppose that so you currently are conscious, right? And if I were to add an extra neuron with an extra connection to you, you would also be conscious, right? And probably have more or less indistinguishable consciousness from you are. Similarly, if I took away a neuron from your current brain, you'd still be conscious, right? So like right in your brain right now, there are the objects, sort of Matthew brain and Matthew brain minus, both of which we agree are conscious sort of independently of each other. So why is it the case that when they're both in the same head, only Matthew is conscious and not Matthew minus, if you see what I mean?
I've heard one explanation why it might not be true, but it's not convincing, because it's integrated information theory. Integrated information theory does give you a reason to expect just one subject with Matthew and Matthew minus, right? But then it also has lots of other problems.
Yeah, I mean, and you might think that, like, okay, so I guess one reason to doubt it is that if you think that, so you can tell all sorts of explanations on all sorts of consistent theories on which this would be false, right? So you could say that, your soul's consciousness involves sort of gathering up the consciousness of, the kind of information processing in all the neurons. So as a result, your brain minus, the information processing, the consciousness that it's transferred to is one value over the whole brain rather than one value over each subset of the brain. Okay, so one reason to think this is there are all sorts of parts of your brain that would only like barely be people. And if you think that consciousness is causally efficacious, then you get all these then you would expect all these sort of chaotically flopping about partial people that are behaving in really weird ways and have psychophysically disharmonious consciousness and so on. And you'd expect if each of these consciousnesses is having a physical effect, then you'd expect there to be a lot of different physical effects that we don't observe.
Yeah, but then you can be an ephemeralist, dualist, something like that, right?
Yeah, but you shouldn't be.
But surely update in favor of this view, given SIA, is so big, right? Because there's so many.
Anything that makes more
people
right?
Take me seriously, you know.
But I think once you think every possible person exists.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Yeah. There's some credence in this. But I don't know. It's an interesting theory. I think Dustin Crummett did have a paper.
He has written a paper on it. Yeah, but I'm not sure. Somehow the arguments he gives for it are a little bit. Somehow seem a little bit not to the point. He chose a weird selection of arguments to give in favor of this view. Maybe he probably has his reasons for doing this, but I thought that there are more natural ways to motivate it. So,
yeah. I did at one point have the thought that this might be an argument for theism, where it seems like atheism, there does seem to be something bad about setting things up this way. And so, but this does seem to be the most natural kind of consciousness laws. So maybe theism predicts with higher probability that there wouldn't be all these partial consciousnesses in your head than atheism.
Why is it such a bad way of setting things up?
Well, because it makes it so that there are all these impotent, psychophysically disharmonious, partially conscious subjects that are just basically along for the ride.
Does it have to be disharmonious? I mean, if you look at, I guess it depends on what view you're taking. If
you cut out much of your brain, you get something psychophysically disharmonious. If you cut out most of your brain and had that thing not physically affect what you do, you'd certainly get psychophysical disharmony.
But I think that, at least under some explanations, you can say that they're getting what they're causally working for. I think it's kind of silly because I think physicalism is, but under Dan Dennett's multiple draft model, right, there are these different drafts which are what causes what we call consciousness, and they do influence all of them, the activity of the brain to some degree, and it's that holistic influence of those drafts that
right. But the extent to which the causal effects that a part of the brain has depend on other things that are happening in the part of the brain, things other than are happening in the part of the brain. And so if you think that the way consciousness is calculated is just by that there's a conscious subject for every part of the brain that would independently display consciousness, then you just have all these consider the part of the brain responsible for processing visual signals. So you have a distinct consciousness that basically sees stuff and is wholly disconnected from anything else or something. I don't know exactly if there is a part of the mind where if you cut out the rest of it and just had that, you would just get something like that. But I don't know, you get all sorts of really weird things.
If you believe in, so you believe that a lot of animals are conscious, right? And I understand their experiences are not disharmonious, but they are kind of likely to be pretty weird, right? I don't see why you'd have this sort of super high prior, or super low prior in having weird human parts be conscious, but have a, think that, oh yeah, animals being conscious and having different kinds of consciousness and stuff, that's fine. I don't really see why.
Maybe there are 3 consciousnesses in each of our heads, for God makes man in his image.
Guys, I have to drop here. My lunch break is over, but it's been great, insightful comments from all you guys.
Yeah, nice chatting, Tim. Always fun to chat. Always fun to chat with people with long or medium-sized last names and first names of 3 letters. This seems to be everyone in the call.
All right, see you, Doug.
Yeah. I agree. This is kind of weird. I'll have to give this one more thought. This is one of the things of the philosophical things where you're that's a weird result. But I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough.
Yeah, but it seems important if it's true. So maybe you should think about it more.
Yeah, possible.
Yeah.
I do think probably you shouldn't have a super high credence in it. And there are just lots of ways that your actions might have super high impact. So like, I don't know, not clear exactly what you do, but yeah. Okay, I guess maybe I'll respond to some more of the chat comments. Okay, let's see, are there any interesting? Okay. Okay.
So someone thinks he's pointed out where SIA goes wrong, by the way. So maybe you should try to get him on the call.
Yeah, I mean, anyone's free to join. If you think SIA goes wrong somewhere, reflective journey in particular, should think that. Okay, so, I mean, regarding this, the idea is, so a coin is flipped, one person's created, a coin's flipped. If it comes up tails, 999 other people get created. If you reject SIA, right, then after learning you're the first person, which had a 1 in 1,000 chance on conditional on the coin coming up tails, and it was certain conditional on the coin coming up heads, you should now think that the coin is 1,000 times likelier to come up heads than tails, even though it's a fair coin that hasn't been flipped yet. Like there's just like what happens when you don't accept the SIA priors of tails being 1,000 times likelier than heads and apply Bayes' theorem. Assuming you apply the principle of indifference across 1,000 people, and even if you don't, you get some results. I explained this in my article. The master argument for the self-indication assumption is even better than I thought it was. So okay, let's see. Are there any other comments that are worth?
I think sort of what troubles me most about. So I think like a lot of your arguments are good, but also there's the fact that like, so I think I'm right about this, but like I'm not sure I've seen you make this exact argument before. It seems if I adopt compartmentalized contextualization, which is the only other sort of well-motivated theory, then just I make a bunch of mundane observations, then my credences just go towards SIA anyway, just by virtue of making like a bunch of observations like that have nothing to do with the proposition at hand. And then that sort of seems to undermine any like motivation I have for adopting CC in the first place, because like I just end up with SIA credences after some time.
Yeah, this is right. The Anthropic argument, it's a little weaker on compartmentalized conditionalization, but it still works fine.
Yeah.
I actually think it also probably works on SSA, but
really?
No. Yeah. So the reason I think it works on SSA, I mean, okay. So I think there are two reasons why atheism is toast if it accepts SIA. The first one, sorry, SSA. The first one is that the only plausible explanation of fine tuning is a multiverse. And if you accept that there is a multiverse, then multiverse plus SSA is very bad. So once you accept SSA, then that basically rules out a multiverse, and then you get nuked by fine tuning. The second point is that, so I think the kinds of worlds theism predicts, it predicts extreme worlds. It predicts worlds that are really big and really small. The reason why there might be a small world, like, I don't know, maybe you think God has sort of some choice in how he creates. Maybe, Christianity is right, and there's some element of the Christian story on which he only creates creatures who are in his image or something. Like, conditional on theism, you should assign like some credence to the thing that has been believed by nearly all Christian thinkers throughout nearly all of human history, which is that basically like God only creates one or two or something, a small number of worlds. He doesn't create tons of aliens. But then if you have some credence in that, then theism will do okay on compartmentalized conditionalization. It will predict a non-trivial credence in a world that's of a size. Sorry, did I say compartmentalized? I meant on SSA. It'll predict a non-trivial credence in a world that's small enough to be fine on SSA. In contrast, I think naturalism, so theism predicts probably really big world and maybe really small world. Naturalism predicts a sort of intermediate smear of worlds where it predicts worlds that are like maybe really big but finite, maybe worlds with Aleph null people. But so naturalism predicts these sort of like this unhappy medium in the middle where you get a bunch of people and so then it does poorly on both SSA and SIA. Like you want an extreme theory in order to be anthropically viable, and SIA does that.
Unless there's like some moderate anthropic principle that no one's come up with yet, but I think that's kind of unlikely because most of the territory seems to have been mapped already. I think Carl Smith points this out that he's sort of like that you might maybe want to wait for theory X in anthropics, but like it seems that you could quite easily construct some sort of impossibility theorems to show that there isn't like a theory that satisfies.
In fact,
every limit
the
satisfied.
paper I'm currently working on is titled "There's No Anthropic Theory X," where I argue
Very
for
good.
that. I mean, actually, so yeah.
Man, you just steal all my ideas, right? I'm so behind you. It's great. It's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know stuff about decision theory. I don't know anything about decision theory. And you've read way more of the literature than I have, sir. Like you're always mentioning all these papers that you know. I don't read things. I just
you just into it.
yeah. I get all my ideas from the armchair. Okay, Mono may have pinpointed where SIA goes wrong from a statistical perspective. Yeah, so Mono is a smart guy. I would be interested. He has a very good YouTube channel that you should check out, and he has a Substack. So I would recommend viewing those. But I don't think that you've pinpointed where SIA goes wrong. But we'll have to see when you come up with your critique. Let's see. Are there other interesting comments from the chat? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it seems like the chat is mostly out of criticisms. They've conceded. They all accept SIA. No, I don't think that's likely. Yeah, if anyone else wants to call in, you're all free to call in. And yeah, I wish the kinds of people who left like long and confused comments called in, because it's much more fun to like talk to those people face to face than it is to like write out a long reply to them and then have them write out their long confused reply, and for it to be like, okay, I could write a long reply, but like, oh, come on, you know. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I think it's also you just want to feel like you've won, right? This is like part of the psychology here.
This is true. Yes, that's certainly part of it. Yeah, I think I have begun blocking people on. Well, I've only blocked one person on something, but I've begun adopting a policy of blocking people more frequently, because it's so frustrating to deal with people who are very confused and very sort of overconfident and cocky. Like the one person who I blocked, this person wrote an article called "The Anthropic Argument for God," where the basic point was, it doesn't SIA imply that you should think not only that there are infinite copies of you, but that if you see a rock, that there are infinite copies of the rock, so that your existence is more likely. Now,
well, if you think that you have very rock-like experiences, then maybe.
Yeah, right. This is true. But like, I mean, if like the thing that was so annoying about the post, and I left a long comment, and then they left a long comment, and like their response to my long comment was like, oh, it's just a joke, chill out. But I mean, I think my comment was decently chill. I was slightly annoyed because it's the criticism. Like, I think before commenting on some subject, you should know at least one thing about it. And if you'd read like anything about SIA, like this is just like everywhere that people bring up SIA. And the other thing is, it's not actually a parody, because generally what you want out of a parody is you want to have the arguments that are in support of position A to also be in support of position B. It's not merely enough for principle B to rhyme with principle A. It's not merely enough for them to sound similar. It has to be that the arguments are similar. Now, the reason SIA doesn't give you a reason to think that there are infinite rocks. So like even just the core motivation for SIA, just the core intuition of like, if you exist, it's likelier that that other people would exist. Sorry, that if more people exist, it's likelier that one of them would be you. That core intuition, that doesn't work for the rocks, because it's true that if there are infinite rocks, it's likelier that any particular rock would exist, so the rock in front of you is likelier to exist. But if you only see one rock, it's proportionally less likely to be seen by you. So the probabilities exactly cancel out, and you get no update in favor of thinking that, say, space is tiled with rocks. No, I mean, you should think there are infinite rocks because there are infinite copies of you with your experiences. And so some of those are rocks. So you should think there are infinite rocks for that reason. But you shouldn't think that there are like these irrelevant spatiotemporally disconnected rocks. And so, then, and, when you get to the parity, they present the view as, I'm not going to defend this principle after presenting the RSIA, a theory that predicts more rocks existing, predicts your pet rock existing more likely. They say, I'm not going to defend this principle as it's just blatantly obvious. It is intuitive and obvious to anyone who reflects on it. Adelstein has also compiled 27 and then crossed out intuition pumping syllogisms, arguments for the SIA, which prove it to be the case. I mean, it's just there's something maximally infuriating about a person who's read nothing, who knows nothing, and is extremely smug. And then when you point out their errors, they're like, haha, it's just a joke. It's just maximally infuriating. By the way, Mono, you're free to join the live stream. Would love to have you. Okay, you're joining soon. All right, nice. Yeah, I found that very annoying.
Also,
Yes,
let's say the argument in favor of having infinite number of rocks work, that wouldn't imply that wouldn't like even be a hindrance to a SI argument, because if you think there's some kind of multiverse, it wouldn't really be unexpected to find. If there's an infinite number of universes, you would also expect an infinite number of rocks, essentially. So,
yeah, well, the idea is by parallel reasoning to the anthropic argument. Oh, okay. Oh, Mono's not joining now. Very sad. Very sad. Mono's busy sharpening his blade against my back. He has to do that first. I mean, right. So the idea is that by parallel reasoning to SIA, you end up thinking that there are a big cardinality of infinity worth of rocks, and then that's unlikely on atheism. But yeah, I mean, it's just very annoying. It's just you got to pick one. You can be smug. If you're smug and you're smart, like that's fine. Mike Humer is a little smug, but like he's a smart guy. Maybe smug is the right word, but he's very confident in all his views, and he's like, well, this is obviously wrong. Okay, it's very endearing.
He's definitely smug.
Yeah, and there are lots of people who are dumb, but who or who are confused. They don't know anything. Okay, but it's not their field of expertise. This is perfectly fine. You can, not knowing things is fine. But if you combine being smug and not knowing anything, it's just this maximally infuriating combination. It really grinds my gears. Yeah, let's see. Do people have other criticisms? Maybe I should just wrap up the live stream. Yeah, by the way, Mono had an interview with Humer, and the interview was hilarious. Because Humer was just sort of being like Humer was asked about tons of things, and I let me find what the title was. I remember the title was a good description of what was funny about the interview. The subtitle, thumbnail was Humer goes wild, and it was Humer going wild. Humer was being kind of it was like Humer being peak humor, which was very humorous. But yeah, I guess maybe I don't know. Do any of you have any last criticisms of SIA or the anthropic argument?
No, you've solved it. Yeah, God exists. What do you say?
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, I think my initial criticism was about me existing not leading to a change in the probability. That argument was confused. Yeah, I'm still on the second bit. So like, but I mean, yeah, I mean this even is the problem just with that. So I mean, with the second one, I mean so that the probability of you just being having your experiences ad infinitum being more likely than not. But I mean, one thing that I guess counts in favor of the SIA here is that just rejecting the SIA by no means helps here, because I mean, even like just completely apart from the SIA, the question still remains. For example, why I find myself having the experience of a human being rather than one of an animal, when the chance of me having the experience of an animal is extremely higher than me having the experience of a human side.
Yeah, well, so that works if you sort of think of yourself as randomly drawn from the set of all conscious creatures. If you think you're like equally likely to be any consciousness, but I didn't think like that's the right way. Like, it's not like you were given some like randomized soul across every member of the animal kingdom, and it was more likely to be human than animals. You should favor theories on which there are more people that you might presently be, and you should split your credence across the number of centers of like consciousnesses per world that you might presently be. And so, like, if you do that, it's just not the right way of thinking about it in terms of.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if dualism holds, then
I said which it does.
In case then. Like it seems to me at least that you should only think that you are not drawn from this full pool of consciousnesses, but only the pool of human consciousness. If there's some interaction between the soul and the physical world, to ensure that the souls from the human consciousness pool end up being.
Well, even if dualism is true, you shouldn't necessarily think of your soul as like randomly drawn from a pool. Like what you should just do is you know you exist, and then you do the kind of probabilistic analysis discussed behind SIA, and then you conclude there are more people that exist. Wow, I got very pale again. I don't know why my camera does this. It like makes the light makes it very weird. Like the light just changes in bizarre ways. Sometimes it gets very dark. Sometimes it becomes purple. I don't know why. Yeah. Well, all right. So I guess maybe I'll wrap things up then. But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. All 16 of you currently watching. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Those of you who have. Nice talking to you both, Dan and Max.
Thanks.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.
See ya.
See ya.